Welcome to the convening of the California Dyslexia Initiative Professional Learning Network. I'm Dave Gordon, the Sacramento County Superintendent of Schools. On behalf of the California Dyslexia Initiative and our Board of Education, I welcome you back for this spring PLN. Last fall, the California Dyslexia Initiative hosted the Fall Professional Learning Network with a variety of fabulous presenters and experts in their fields of supporting students with reading difficulties and dyslexia. Today, we have the honor of learning from Dr. Tracy Weeden, President and CEO of the Neuhaus Education Center. Her keynote address is titled, Literacy is a Human Right of the 21st Century. Following her address, there are a variety of breakout sessions for you to choose from with topics that include understanding the current science of dyslexia and proven instructional approaches, addressing needs of students within an MTSS framework, providing intervention for struggling readers, support for English learners, and using the right data to support students. I hope you enjoy your time together and thank you for being here to learn with us to improve reading outcomes for our students.
Thank you, Superintendent Gordon. Good morning and welcome to the Spring Professional Learning Network. My name is Tammy Wilson and I'm the project lead for the California Dyslexia Initiative. I'm excited to learn with you today from our amazing presenters. To kick off our PLN today, we have Dr. Tracy Weeden, President and CEO of the Neuhaus Education Center. Dr. Tracy Weeden is a committed leader dedicated to advancing literacy success and academic excellence for all. She brings 28 years of experience to a calling of shaping dynamic systems change so that children are well prepared for the realities of a 21st century knowledge economy. Dr. Weeden is also a relentless literacy advocate who frames literacy as a fundamental human right that transforms the family tree when evidence-based practices are scaled responsibly. Her life's work has been to position literacy success for all as a moral imperative that creates a place at the table for every child and adult, regardless of zip code or country of origin. I am really excited and looking forward to this presentation. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Tracy Weeden.
Hello, Tammy, and hello, everyone. It's such an honor to be with you today, all the way in California from Houston, Texas, which is where I hail from now, even though I grew up in inner city Detroit. So I'm so thankful for every one of you educators who are dedicating your lives and pouring yourselves out for our children, who are our future, who are our hope. And I just want to acknowledge you in case you don't hear it from anyone else today, regardless of your role. Thank you for your dedicated service to our community. Well, today, as you heard, I want to talk to you about literacy as a human rights issue of the 21st century. And it's high stakes, super high stakes for our children. You see, I consider it a moral imperative because I consider literacy to be a form of privilege. I have the opportunity to pay forward. Every day, I'm blessed to breathe the good air of this earth. I am driven by that, particularly when I think about my own family tree and how, had I not had a mother who was a struggling reader and a father who received special education services, who combined efforts to ensure the 7 of us would have better life outcomes than they did. And they intrinsically understood that literacy was somehow tied to that future for us. And so how can I not pay that privilege forward? And I want you to join me on that journey today. I want you to think about how on your watch, things absolutely must change. And I want you to know that Neuhaus Education Center is dedicated to real, sustainable, measurable systems change. And this is why. When we look at the nation's report card, NAEP data makes it clear. When we look at that top row of students who are the critical mass of all students, as a nation, we are underperforming. When you consider that yellow row, that 66% of students are performing below proficient, when the proven evidence-based science is available to us, it is a matter of looking at what we inherited systemically and determining on our watch, is that good enough for our children? And if not, moving with a sense of urgency towards proven practices, which we'll talk more about today. I want you to note here that children with disabilities are also under that bar, in that 89% of children nationally are performing below proficient. And 70% of those students are even below basic. They don't have the basic foundational skills at all. So what are those students to do in terms of quality of life? And there's so many dynamics about quality of life that are tied to literacy for a lifetime. It's also interesting when you look at historically marginalized groups. When we look at students who are navigating the war zone of poverty, here we see 52% of those students, over half of those students who might be white, Black, or brown, they might be from any student demographic, are below proficient and even below basic, 52%. When we look at students who are African American and Hispanic, 56% below basic nationally and 50% below basic in terms of Hispanic students. Native American, Alaskan American, or American Indian, 57%, and Asian or Pacific Islander, 19%. We can see the demographic dynamics here in a country that is growing in its multicultural dynamic. So we cannot afford to fail any students on our watch. And so this creates a sense of urgency for me, and I certainly hope it does for you. Now, some might hope that, all right, maybe we didn't prevent reading failure in the first place as we look at those foundational skills, but over time, surely students get better. Well, the answer is no. I don't know about you, but on my watch, I remembered leading curriculum instruction and assessment as an assistant superintendent in the 7th largest district in the country, the Houston Independent School District. And this is during the Reading First days. And I didn't know what I didn't know. But I want to tell you, now that I know better, I want to empower and support every educator in doing better, because it's not about me. It's about the faces represented by these numbers, our children. And I don't care if you're white, Black, I don't care what zip code you come from. I want all children to thrive and to achieve. And I'm sure you do too, because that's why you're here. When we look at 8th graders and the critical mass of those students, 70% below proficient. Public schools, charter schools, private schools. Every zip code is affected by this literacy crisis. And as a country, if we want to remain internationally competitive, literacy is the language of math, social studies, science, STEM, even certification pathways for children who choose not to go to college. Literacy is what allows us to navigate the world confidently. And so if we look at children and we look at them either demographically or we look at them as far as those who are on free and reduced lunch, again, below basic, this is a huge critical mass of students who are not being served well yet on our watch. Some are, and where those, I call them lighthouse districts or lighthouse schools exist, let's go and see what that's like in action and have a mental model about how to apply what is proven practice. And of course, during this time of COVID, there has been a decrease in those numbers. When we look at all students, we've seen a score change of a negative 5%, 7% decrease for students with disabilities. Those on free and reduced lunch, 7% decrease, 5% decrease for white students, 6% for Black and Black and Hispanic students. So again, with a sense of urgency, how do we gain the ground that has been lost and move ahead and forge forward with focused intentionality? This work can be done. And I want you to know, as we work on this challenge nationally, we have seen the critical mass of students shift dramatically based on proven practices in all demographic groups, whether we're talking high poverty, whether we're talking multilingual students, whether we're talking African-American students who may come with a different dialect construct when they come to school. And so they need to understand the structure of the language and be able to transfer the skills that they gained in their neighborhood, but also understand explicitly the differences between the high prestige or perceived high prestige language of the classroom while honoring the dialect they're loved in. And so we can have both and, it doesn't have to be either or. And this is why the stakes are so incredibly high. I will never forget a journey I took to a maximum security prison in Livingston, Texas. And it is where death row inmates are also housed. And a friend of mine who was working with inmates so they could pass the GED discovered her ability and knowledge about how to diagnostically and prescriptively address the gaps in someone's ability to read was serving her very well. Here are these grown men, 60 of them that I got to spend time with that day in 2 groups of 30. What I experienced was at least a third of them had been warehoused in special education classrooms where teachers had not been honored and apprenticed in their craft to know how to teach them to read. And some of them actually graduated and didn't know how to read, were not literate. Some dropped out and gave up. Many of them were Black and brown men. And the common denominator, regardless of zip code, only one person that day came from a high SES background. The critical mass of those inmates, high poverty, navigating that war zone of poverty, and unsuccessfully, I might add, making very unfortunate decisions, not all of them tied to literacy, because there are other barriers to learning other than literacy. But most certainly what we've seen and experienced is when we get literacy right, then we have the space to address other barriers to learning. We think about multi-tiered systems of support, and we can address those barriers as well. But this is compelling, I hope, data. When you think about among all countries in the world, the one country with the highest incarceration rate is the United States of America. And when you think about China and India and the population density of those countries, we still have more inmates than these countries do. That is why this is a human rights issue. And I want you to think about the students who had access, if they happen to be dyslexic or have a reading disability, to a parent with the means to use their economic privilege to get them the services they need, or they were in a school, public or private or charter, where teaching the structure of the English language explicitly was something that they were able to benefit from. Those students are much less likely to end up in the school to prison pipeline. And I must tell you, that day there was one gentleman who waited until all the others had dispersed, and of Mexican Puerto Rican heritage. He came up to me and his posture was just low, oppressed, deep sadness, life sentence. And he had been coming to these GED classes, building his literacy skills. And he said, Dr. Weeden, should I earn my GED? Is it even worth it? I have a life sentence. And I said, Jacob, you get your education, you get your GED, so your children will know you achieved this, even though you cannot rear them. And this is something no one can take from you. And so that was 10 years ago, and he got his GED. And we're still connected because now he writes newsletters for inmates to lift their spirits and help them have the moral courage to live for the next day and the next day and continue to grow. But that is a cautionary tale when we think about this dynamic and the high stakes. Did you know that 85% of youth in our juvenile court system, those adjudicated youth, are functionally illiterate? There is a clear intersection between the school to prison pipeline and functional illiteracy. However, what we learn about those who actually many times are identified as dyslexic in prison, their recidivism, if they learn to read, decreases dramatically. Whether they are functionally illiterate because it was dysteachia and teachers didn't have the knowledge and the understanding of how to deliver instruction to close those gaps as hard as they have been working, or whether it is dyslexia. And the recidivism decreases from that 70% to 16% just by addressing literacy. Think about how much power educators have in their hands if they're focused on what serves children well. If they're focused on determining what do I need to strategically abandon, because on my watch, I am responsible and accountable for what happens to the children that I'm serving. And if we think about the sheer cost to taxpayers to warehouse inmates, $25,000 on average per year, and double that for those who are juvenile offenders, that is squandering resources we could be putting into education, in prevention, instead of intervening when someone ends up in the pipeline. So I hope that this clear link between academic failure and delinquency and violence, it's welded to reading failure. And it's something we can do something about. The science has been proven. It's the knowing doing gap that we can close together. And I'm not saying it's easy work, it's hard work. Anything worth doing well requires hard work and it requires expert coaching. That's why I really appreciate the work of many states on making sure that they have people who are apprenticed to coach well so that teachers can adopt these practices, leaders can support these practices, and we can change the trajectory of the lives of many of our children. Some people don't care as much about the moral imperative. Well, I'm going to meet people where they are. And as an ambassador of change, I hope you will too, because these are things you can share. For example, if all adults in the US were functioning at the equivalent of a 6th grade reading level, look at the economic power behind that. $2.2 trillion annually would be the result of what educators can breathe life into. And this pandemic has given us, I think, the opportunity to really be big and bold and think and retool and reimagine education and make literacy the bullseye, the center point, the focus point. Because when we have not only foundational literacy in place, when we ensure structured literacy practices, prepare our children not only to read in the language of power, but to write in the language of power and express their ideas in the language of power. They have a place at the table and they do not have to end up on the menu of the new Jim Crow. And that is working for pennies for privatized prisons. That's the bottom line. I can't put my head on my pillow at night in peace, knowing that I was complacent and complicit, and I hope neither can you. So I hope I've made the case sufficiently that this is a knowledge economy and an information age that we're preparing our children for. And with artificial intelligence, many of the low-level jobs, low-paying jobs are going to go away. So we have a window of opportunity here, friends, that we want to make sure children can learn and be literate for life so that they can have a place at the table. There are tons of jobs, millions of jobs that employers can't fill because people don't have the skills that they really need, and they're often tied to literacy. And so if we are backloading not to a standardized test for a state, that it can be very political in how it is established, right? It's not about that high stakes test, the tail that can wag the dog, if you will, in our profession. It's about preparing children for this. It is about measuring growth over time. It is about not allowing a state test to say, this defines the value and the ability of our children. And for some of our students, the first time they encounter grade level text, on grade level text, it's when they take that standardized test. That's unacceptable. We don't want to measure class advantage. The parent who can pay, which I would give my children my best too, for tutoring. But another parent has to choose between tutoring or dyslexia therapy and groceries and gas. We have to scale this work intentionally and sustainably. There's a book I highly recommend written by a gentleman named Dr. Stephen Kleinberg, and it's called The Prophetic City, Houston at the Cusp of a Changing America. And he has done a multi-year deep dive study into Houston because we're one of the most diverse cities in the country. And his famous quote is, as goes Houston, so goes the nation. And one of the things that Dr. Kleinberg says, and I completely agree as I look at the landscape nationally, is that the source of wealth for Houston and our nation in the 21st century will have to do with attracting the best and brightest people in America working on the cutting edge of knowledge. I work virtually at times from my home and from my office. And if I were not literate, I could not be on this call with you today sharing the thoughts I'm sharing with you today. This is the world. This is the new frontier. The resource of the knowledge economy is housed between the ears of the best and brightest people in America who can live anywhere. That is the power we give our children. It means when they're positioned for a knowledge economy, they may be able to stay in their community and serve and lead, not lead. It means we can position them to be change agents in our communities. So one of the things I want to underscore today is that as a nonprofit, Neuhaus Education Center is here to help. We are about developing sustainability in systems, not just giving fish, but teaching educators to cast that line and ensure this upstream issue that Desmond Tutu talks about. Desmond Tutu said something so powerful. He said, instead of fishing people out of the river downstream, let's look upstream and see what caused them to fall in the river in the first place. We believe it's never too late to learn to read. Our Family Support Office is available to you. And at the end of my presentation, I want you to save the information if you have a family member struggling with navigating getting support for their student. Our Family Support Office has experts who can help families take those next steps to get their student what they need. Because at times a parent is told it's a developmental delay or other things that have nothing to do with the truth. And it may be that that student is dyslexic and unidentified. And so their reading failure is not being prevented. We want to come alongside those parents and support them. Secondly, we repurpose our building that I'm sitting in today so that we can deliver services face-to-face, but also virtually to adults who have never had the privilege of learning to read. We have one gentleman who is 88 years old. He is Hispanic, and the language that he was loved in is Spanish, but he never learned to read. His goal was to be able to read to his grandchildren during Christmas celebrations in 2022. And guess what? He did it for the first time. So it's never too late to read. And so we took the opportunity of the pandemic to exploit the pandemic and figure out how can we deliver services virtually to people who don't live in our backyard. And so I'm so proud of our work when it comes to adult literacy. And when I hear about people passing certifications or so many great stories, and I'll tell you some of those later, it literally transforms the family tree. And then you are VIPs. We want to ensure that educators are apprenticed regardless of role for the goal of systemic change where literacy leads the way. And they succeed at ensuring the critical mass of children not only become proficient, but in an information age, the target is advanced. And I love working with leaders who say, we're not trying to just hit the target of proficiency. We want to stretch to get students to, as many of them to performing at advanced levels, so that navigating college systems is not overwhelming to them. So they are proficient in expressing their ideas, in writing, and in reading and thinking critically. So that's who we are, and we are here to serve. I want you to think for a moment about your literacy privilege. Like I said earlier, I consider it a privilege I am dedicated to paying forward. Words, they're containers of power, whether they are spoken or written. Think about the people who are no longer on this earth, who wrote things that still influence you today. So with that in mind, you might be that 5% of people who learned to read effortlessly. You pretty much cracked the code yourself, and you figured out a lot about the structure of the language independently. But here's the thing, 10 to 15%, it's a very challenging journey. And on the continuum of being dyslexic, there are those who are mildly dyslexic, moderately dyslexic, and those who are severely dyslexic. So for those who are severely dyslexic, you've got to provide explicit, intensive instruction. But that instruction doesn't hurt any kid. So for the 45 to 50% who need that structured literacy instruction, we want to give them the same treatment, if you will. So how to do that and how to differentiate based on that multi-tiered system of support is absolutely crucial. So it's not one size fits all. It's the exact treatment that is needed for that student. 35%, it's mostly easy. They need some broad instruction. That's the category I fell into. But my baby sister, who listened to my mother working with me at home, went to kindergarten reading and they double promoted her. So think about how you learned to read. Think about how you learned to spell. Did it come easily to you? Do you still have struggles? We need to think about how we receive what I call the currency of the 21st century. Literacy gives us that place at the table where we can invest our literacy opportunity in our future. So think about that for me in terms of your journey. And the thing about literacy, whether a parent is dyslexic or whether that student is struggling because they never received powerful first instruction. And so the Matthew effect takes hold. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And when I get poorer at something and I feel like maybe I'm dumb or stupid or something's wrong with me, which is what I hear from adult literacy students, that affects the social emotional part of that individual. That could lead to someone who has other struggles with substance abuse, some suicidal. We talked about the pipeline to prison. This is high stakes. But this research from the Brookings Institute is so fascinating to me because it shows the power of an educated mom. As you can see, the bar that represents those who come from poverty and those who come from moderate to high income, the likelihood of coming to school kinder ready is quite dynamically different based on one huge differentiator, whether you're white, Black, Hispanic. There are moms who have less high school education, and their children are less likely to come to school kinder ready. Moms with a high school education, you see an improvement in that, and an increase that their kids are more likely to come to school kinder ready. Look at what happens when a mom can navigate a college system and earn a bachelor's degree or more. It soars even above those moms who are married and may come from moderate to high income. Isn't it fascinating? And what intuitively I suspect is going on here, it's not about attending a preschool, because we know the quality of preschools varies based on zip code at times, unless we're intentional about partnering with preschool organizations to ensure that they are really preparing children for the future with those foundational literacy and math skills. But it is this differentiator of a mom who's navigated a university experience successfully, and that takes literacy skills, which are transferable and generational. So when we know that, we look at how powerful this is. Again, it is the bullseye that we want to focus on. Yes, adult literacy impacts generations for sure. And this gentleman, I actually had dinner with. This is John. He grew up in Mexico. I mean, his family grew up in Mexico and then came to the United States. And Chow here is another one of our adult literacy students. They have both had dynamic improvements in quality of life as a result of becoming literate. Chow always wanted to go to college. She went to community colleges 3 times, could not navigate based on the remedial courses, came to Neuhaus, and is now shooting for A's in every class and doing amazing work. So what if we front-loaded this to students so that teachers could get reading right the first time and could recognize those red flags for dyslexia with appropriate screening and intervention? That is the target to hit. So what are some of the reasons for illiteracy? One of the reasons is that there are languages that people are loved in, and that needs to be honored. It is a form of currency that allows someone to operate within the social system that they're loved in. And that needs to be acknowledged and honored. And some of the things that are learned in those systems are transferable. For example, some of the letter sounds in Spanish are the same in English, but others are not. So being able to explicitly differentiate is a form of currency to give to students. The same thing for other language varieties. Same thing for dialects. There's a dialect I was loved in inner city Detroit. And you better believe when I go back to my neighborhood, I can code switch. I can be very intentional about what form of currency I'm going to pull out of my pocket and use to have a place at the table. Every student deserves that. So yes, I believe in biliteracy. Also, home environment. If I'm a mom and I'm working 3 jobs to make ends meet, having that lap reading may not be a luxury. I may not be able to afford books in my home. And so we have to acknowledge that is a differentiator, but it's not an excuse. It is not an excuse for us not to find ways to be creative and strategic and empowering those parents who are navigating the war zone of poverty, trying to make ends meet. Also, there are reasons for illiteracy that are instructional. You know, I think back about the things I didn't know, the things that I should have been strategically abandoning because they were not based on evidence and what works. It might be familiar and comfortable, but it is immoral for me to continue in those practices if they're not serving children well. So it's a moral imperative for me to be a lifelong learner and keep my saw sharpened so that I am giving my students the very best intellectual nourishment, my educators setting them up for the very best success possible. In the systems we work in, and there is a district you're going to hear about later from our Vice President of Literacy Initiatives nationally. They are committed, this district, to giving the best to their educators to set them up for success. And what we find nationally is teacher retention goes up too, when there's a real focus on systems change that sets educators up to win at their work. What educator shows up and says, I want to be a loser today? That's not why we enter this profession. It's a calling. And so it's imperative that inadequate instruction be replaced with powerful instructional practices. There is also that upstream issue, and that is there are universities who are those outliers, determined, and who have a real calling to empowering educators to win at their work. And I want to celebrate those universities out there that are doing that and are transforming and rethinking teacher preparation and leader preparation, because leaders can't lead what they don't understand. So from the superintendent preparation program to principal preparation to central office, everyone needs to understand the implications for the science of reading research and how to apply it with conscious competence. And for those universities that are not, what are you doing? How are you able to put your head on your pillow at night knowing that teachers are not being set up to succeed? We cannot prevent student failure if we do not prevent educator failure. Educators deserve our very best, and that means getting out of the comfort zone and rethinking how we bring honor to the most important profession of all professions. There are not going to be great lawyers, scientists, engineers, or a great anybody else. And so really the nation's assessment of educational progress is also a report card for universities. Think about that for a minute. If teachers are not set up and leaders are not set up for success, that goes back to that upstream issue. And we get to demand more, and we need to celebrate the universities that are stepping up to the plate and doing great work. And if you want to follow that work, the National Council for Education, NCTQ, the National Council for Teacher Quality, please follow their work. There are also inequities when identifying students with dyslexia or other learning difficulties. The wait to fail model is not working for many of our children. They are those falling through the cracks, and we know the potential outcomes for them. And so as a national thought partner, call on us. Neuhaus Education Center is here to help you to be that shoulder partner, because we got to plan the work. And if we plan the work well, then we can work the plan. And we need to anticipate there will be mid-course adjustments we need to make along the way. It is not a straight line. It is fraught with challenges. The unexpected happens. So having someone who will be that accountability and thought partner along the way is essential for you, and you deserve that support. So when we think about, again, those cut scores based on NAEP and where we are as a nation, when we think about the percentage of students who are decreasing in their ability to read, and we think about the economic impact of dyslexia, not just in terms of the people in the world who are not being served, but we talked about the other impacts, economic, health impacts. There's so many impacts. What are we going to do on our watch to change that? This is specific to your state of California. Did you know that this piece of research by Boston Consulting Group indicates that by neglecting dyslexic learning, focusing on a model of prevention and early identification, and making sure that evidence-aligned practices are a part of how students are taught to read properly the first time. But specifically dyslexia has cost the state $12 billion a year. Think about what could be done when that funding is recaptured if we have tight systems to address this issue. We even have a national imperative that was a bipartisan act called the First Step Act that includes provisions for screening inmates. Well, I want to tell you, screening inmates for dyslexia is a work in progress. My understanding is there is not a valid and reliable instrument in place nationally to provide that for those with dyslexia. And often, an inmate's ability to exit the prison system and hopefully have a place in society is tied to passing the GED. Well, guess what, friends? If you don't learn how to read, you can't pass the GED. The standards have been raised, and it's even more challenging an exam to pass than it was before. And for the math section, how can I understand what they're asking me to do if I cannot read a word problem? So it's imperative that we address this issue. You know, this is a mental model that I have used to help myself think about this because, let's be honest, there's a cultural imperative to this as well. We can't ignore. If children feel marginalized, if they feel like the language variety or the dialect that they're loved in is not positioned in a way that it's recognized, it's important for them to operate in their world of home. Or they're told you have bad grammar versus, for example, African-American English is just as rule-based as the structure of the language of the schoolhouse of structured English. If we think about Scarborough's rope, we cannot leave any of these elements to chance. And for those who say that the science of reading research is just about decoding, that's not the truth. We want children not only to be able to read, but to write and to express their ideas. So oral language is the precursor to decoding, for example. But that line that runs throughout for me is a reminder to me that I can acknowledge the language variety of the student in this journey of helping them also earn the currency of structured literacy in English. Because the language of power is a relative term. If I'm in Mexico, the language of power is Spanish, and I want to be able to speak it well. So we want children who are biliterate to understand how to be intentional and strategic about their use of either and to have complete control over both. So with the time remaining, I want you to think about what you learned in the COVID chrysalis. One of the things we learned is that we can leverage technology in ways we didn't realize. So what are the implications? But the most important question is, for the students who have fallen further behind, when we think about the generational ripple effect of literacy, we are in a COVID chrysalis. That's the way I have framed it in a way that gave me my power back. Because at the top of the pandemic for Neuhaus Education Center, our delivery system was face-to-face for teaching and the follow-up coaching, which allows teachers to adopt and leaders to adopt those best practices. And either we were going to throw up our hands and say, oh, well, I guess we have to wait till the pandemic is over, or we were going to have to reinvent the way we did our work. I'm beyond proud of my team. And I will tell you, I love them to pieces and they know it. And I'm not embarrassed to say it out loud. They are rock stars. They were able to combine forces and we thought through this and we were able to create a delivery system that is virtual. So if you're living in Alaska or California, we can reach you and help you meet your goals for your students. As a matter of fact, in the pandemic, we were able to reach as far as Hong Kong and Dubai. So there's no ceiling on our work and there's no ceiling on your work. The question is, what did you learn and how are you determined to reinvent yourself and the right work to reach your students? So it's time to find our wings. As educators, it's time to take our power back and it's time to soar with a sense of urgency into the future for the sake of every child that we serve. You may be familiar with the tale of Stone Soup. It was one of my favorite stories as a kid growing up. And it's about soldiers who came into a village. They were hungry and they were trying to get the villagers to feed them and help them stay nourished. And the villagers were not very friendly. Well, I want you to know that we're here to help you bring the villagers in your system together. Because what happened was they created a vision, and the vision was a big pot on a big fire, and stones were in the bottom of that pot to hold it in place. And so those big rocks, as they boiled the water, brought villagers to look over the edge and become very curious and ask, well, what are you doing? We're making stone soup. Well, I don't see anything in the pot yet. Well, I've got some carrots in my carrot. Let me go grab the carrots. And so chop, 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 the carrots go into the stone soup. The next thing, a villager comes and brings a haunch of beef. And so we have now beef in the stone soup. And so villagers kept showing up and coming into the village square, and adding their nourishment to this pot of soup. For me, this is very analogous to how we need to be working in central office. I experienced, and many of you know what I mean by this, the silo effect, where everyone has a sense of urgency dependent upon what their department is supporting. The curriculum and instruction department focused on certain things. Special education, the English language arts department, the EL department, or the biliteracy department, whatever you may call it. And they're working, but are we working smarter or are we working harder? We need to be working smarter, not just harder all the time, and wearing ourselves out. So what we love to do with district leaders is to bring all of the members of the village to the table. Look at the resources we can control for, which we'll talk about more later if you come to the next session, and then align those resources so that we can strategically abandon the things that aren't working, and we can focus our efforts on the things that are working or that need to be introduced into the system. That is the way we overcome initiative overload. I felt it as a teacher, I felt it as a leader, and I bet a lot of you can feel it too. And part of it is when we're planning the work, before we work the plan, we have not released the things that are actually maybe not best practice and strategically abandon those things, or we're trying to do too many initiatives at one time instead of focusing on the high yield initiative that will move the system forward. And then we introduce the next and the next. But we make sure all arrows are pointing in the same direction from all departments and that everyone is targeting their efforts. Then you get the big quick wins and then the long-term wins. And then you see the needle begin to move. And then you see the culture shift as people are empowered in their work. You see, culture trumps strategy every single time. And the soldiers created a culture of collaboration that led to everyone in the village being nourished. And that is the vision. That should be the vision for our nation. It should be our collective moonshot as a country, for your state, and for your district. And then we can get on to the other barriers to learning, because again, let's be honest. When our children and families are navigating, in particular, the war zone of poverty, or we have a child from a high SES zip code, but the social emotional heavy lift of failing at reading, the first job, as Dr. Nadine Gabb says, that any kid gets is learning to read. There are other barriers to learning that go beyond solid classroom practice. And so I love this model by Edelman and Taylor out of UCLA. It's called Learning Supports. And again, it's about mapping resources and strategic partners to help us with other areas. Let's say, for example, home and family engagement. Maybe you want Neuhaus to help you to offer opportunities to parents who want to improve their literacy skills. And so that is offered in a way where the entire family unit is affected and lifted through literacy. Maybe there's a crisis going on and there's a strategic nonprofit, a profit partner who can lean in and can calibrate for moving literacy forward by removing that barrier. There's so many opportunities to look at ways to empower and enable your ecosystem to be as highly functional as possible. So again, organizing your work and then working the plan. It must start with foundational literacy skills. It must be developmentally appropriate. It must be cross-content. And then we can address the other social emotional barriers to learning that affect the family, that affect the parent, that affect the scholar. And so today I want to encourage you. I want to challenge you to think about, as you learn today, as an ambassador of literacy success for all, as a literacy ally, how can you influence from the middle? Because you see, my friend, literacy and leadership are intrinsically tied together if you are a literacy ally. Always remember, leadership is not about position and title. It is about disposition. It is about growing your intellectual capacity to support the right work and having that moral compass, a values-driven approach to not allowing anybody to keep you from doing what is right for children who you are serving on your watch. Teachers, you are leaders. You are leaders. And when you are excellent at your work, you will rise out of obscurity. People are going to want to come and learn from you as a literacy leader about what works for kids. So please never say, I'm just a teacher. For you teachers out there, you are a VIP. You are a very important professional. And had I not had teachers like you on my watch as a student, I wouldn't be sharing with you today. You are so important. And so literacy is a human right, and we need to fight for it regardless of zip code, regardless of student group, regardless of gender. Every child deserves to be literate for life. Again, let's keep it real. At times, our enemy is not necessarily managing change. It is fear. It is a sense that something terrible may happen, but something terrible is already happening to children who are not being served in our systems. You see, fear is false evidence appearing real. It is false evidence appearing real. So you have to decide what you are willing to stand for because of those core values, because of the shoulders you stand on as an educator, because of those parents who fought for you to have a place at the table, because of those teachers or leaders who saw greatness in you and supported you. You get to pay that literacy privilege forward and refuse to bow down to fear and doubt. You've got to trust yourself once you have the right information and apply it. I believe that you can walk by faith, that you can be a focused adult, intervening tenaciously with hope. Hope is not a strategy. The strategies are the evidence-based practices. But as a focused adult intervening tenaciously with hope, as a literacy leader, as a literacy ally, I can assure you that regardless of the demographic group, regardless of poverty, on your watch, you will see change come. And so be the light. Be that lighthouse teacher. Be that lighthouse principal, lighthouse central office leader, superintendent. Because when you're the light, even if there is resistance to change around you, your light will draw others to you. And then you can be that expression of greatness, of change, of commitment to children, so that other people can have an experience that no one can take from you in your ecosystem, to empower and inspire them that on their watch, it's possible. Be that light. Be that butterfly effect. I believe in the power of public schools. I believe in the power of focused educators. I believe in you. And so with that, I want to end by saying, we are here to serve. We are here to help you make thoughtful decisions about how to invest the variables you can control. The use of time, which is your treasure. We don't want you to waste a second. The use of talent on your watch and the use of funding in a way that can recapture the funding to focus on enrichment for all. How about that? That's what I hear from the leaders we work with. Instead of focusing on intervention after reading failure, we can really have a strong model of prevention and success for all. So if you're someone who enjoys tweeting, follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, reach out to me. Let us know how we can serve you so that you can succeed. And I must tell you, nothing brings me greater joy than walking classrooms and hearing from educators. It's so different now. I'm winning at my work. The critical mass of my children are on grade level, and some of them are advanced and above grade level. Schools that were about to be taken over by state departments, now models of success. That's what it's all about. And so I wish you great success. I wish you great power as you apply what you're learning to change the life trajectory of the students you're serving on your watch for generations to come. You will have a ripple effect beyond anything you can imagine. I appreciate the opportunity and the privilege to share with you today.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Weeden. Your passion and commitment is so inspiring. And I love quotes. I was frantically writing down things you were saying. When we get literacy right, then we have the space to address other barriers, be an ambassador of literacy success for all, and intervene tenaciously with hope among the many others. You've given us a lot to think about, and I know I personally will be watching the recording to process your message again. So thank you all for joining us, and we now invite you to head to your breakout sessions. If you've built a schedule, it will appear on the Event Mobi homepage. If you haven't built a schedule, then go to Spring Sessions on the left side of your homepage to choose a session. You will enter the Zoom by selecting the Join Now button, and it will take you to that Zoom. And at the end of the breakout, we encourage you to complete the session feedback forms. We really do appreciate when you complete the session feedback forms because it informs our planning for next year. So after the second breakout session, come back here for the closing session, and then we will have some job-alike breakout rooms. So please enjoy your morning sessions. I know that was a lot to process. My head's still spinning. So anyway, thank you all for joining us, and please head off to your breakout rooms through the Event Mobi homepage. Bye-bye.